Hi everyone, my name is Tanzil Shafiq. I'm a lecturer of urban design and the project lead for the project called ReWET, out of which this symposium is happening. Hi Jono, I just started. We can check your screen in the break when we start the second panel. Just screen sharing. Okay. All right, cool. So as I was saying, ReWET, the full form is climate impacted dweller led agroecological, revitalizing, ecosystem around the lake in Dhaka. That's a project. The title is too long for me to remember. So I just remember by ReWET. And the essential idea is that we are working with urban slum dweller, urban cooperatives in Dhaka who are, doing vegetation and different sorts of urban nature for now, let's say, along the lake, and we're working with them. This is funded by UK FCDO, that's the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and the grant is managed by IIED in London. As part of the grant work, this is not, the intellectual development of the project is out of our own interest, that as we are starting to work with, different quote unquote natural elements, that is also part of the culture, we started thinking about what is this notion of urban and interaction with nature. And it very much appeared to us that when we're looking at the broad spectrum, mainstream way of talking about nature, right now, the current discourse heavily relies on the idea of a nature-based solution, oftentimes that's used in a very technocratic way, as if nature is going to be the silver bullet that we now deploy to counter climate change, to counter pretty much everything that was wrong with modernization and urbanization. So we're kind of like cautious of throwing the word nature everywhere as a solution, but also we wanted to see what others were doing in this in this intersection between the urban and nature. So we thought of having a sort of a network of people, a network of researchers, who are working on this in a very tangential way, which is why if you see the spectrum of presentations, it's actually quite wide, and that's precisely the goal of expanding this conversation. So far we have had one in-person symposium, as you may be aware. So that happened last week on 15th, and now there was a large participation globally. So we thought it would be best if we do a webinar where we all joined online. So here we are. And just in terms of acknowledgement, the webinar is hosted by the Southern Theorizing Group that I lead here in Sheffield, and also the Urban Institute here at Sheffield. So it's co-hosted by them. I think that's all I have from me now. The way that you see the panel goes, rather than more like an in-depth of your case study or your particular case study, we are interested in sort of like your take on your sort of philosophical, ontological, epistemological, or methodological take on this notion of urban nature. Like, how do you conceptualize this, or don't, or do you critique the word even? So it's open to all of that. So if that makes sense, still the way that we received the abstracts, then we subdivided them into two particular categories. So for today, let me just open this on my cell phone. So for today, we have the panel. The first panel is navigating contemporary non-human life worlds. I'll leave the introductions to the speaker themselves. So when you start, just introduce yourself as well. Very shortly. But as I said, we have 2 hours. Each panel is like roughly 50 minutes. So the idea is really 8 to 10 minutes. You sort of like just take us through the very key point, because what's important is to really see across different contexts how people are engaging with urban nature. And then hopefully, sometime down the line, we'll have like a full-fledged large-scale conference where hopefully we'll be able to, bring you here in Sheffield or somewhere else, I don't know, for a more detailed empirical case study presentation. But at this point, we're really interested in the particular philosophical take from you on urban nature. I'll stop there. And for panel one, I'll ask Belen Desmaison. I don't know, I'm saying it right. No, I'm not.
It's fine. No, his Amazon is French, but okay. I'm used to.
French, so So it's like, okay, I'm not going to attempt. Okay, but yes, please start. And yeah, I'll be strict with time because we just want to really get through everyone.
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm Belén de Mesón. I'm a doctoral student in human geography at Durham University, and I'm also a lecturer and researcher in architecture at the Catholic University in Peru. Thank you again for the invitation. So I work with the inhabitants of Belén, a flood-prone neighborhood in Iquitos, which is the capital of the Peruvian Amazonian region, where approximately 16,000 people are being relocated by the Peruvian government to New Belén due to the changing course of the Amazon River, which will eventually take over the area where Belén is located. So in this dynamic territory, in which water levels rise between 12 and 15 meters every 6 months, and in which rivers quickly change their path, change is the norm. So what can we learn from Amazonian mobility and its ever-changing rhythms in preparations for these times of change and unpredictability? So the prefix "this" implies being apart or away, creating a distance between subject and place. Displacement is then the loss of social, environmental, and emotional relations, of a sense of place, and of the freedom to choose whether to move or to remain in place. So displacement is the negation of place and of home. And emotional geographies bring to the fore the lived experiences and dimensions which are often neglected in decision-making processes. So I use a mix of counter-mapping, art, space research, and architectural ethnography and storytelling to present and analyze the multiple scales of home and of place, which is as understood and lived by the urban amphibian neighborhood of Belén. And I do this because art has a unique capacity to generate complex, nuanced, and empathic understandings. It has the potential to interrupt our habits of seeing and to challenge and alter what and how we know, thus undoing dominant and oppressive ways of knowing and instigating acts of resistance. And evoking the emotions and relational aspects between people and place. So this research explores new ways to see and to learn from what is already familiar and to render visible what is silenced, letting art speak to and create a relationship between artists, researchers, the residents of Belén, and those that observe the drawing. And also, while Latin America is predominantly urban and cities have a large percentage of residents with indigenous backgrounds, this is grossly unaccounted in census data. Policies, programs, and rights portrays indigenous people as being rural and traditional, but on the other hand, due to historic discrimination and exploitation of Amazonian indigenous groups, many migrants in cities do not consider themselves to be indigenous. However, there are ongoing efforts led by younger generations to recover and a sense of pride in their indigeneity. And in this context of rendering invisible urban contemporary indigeneity, Rivera Cusicanqui calls for a Shiksi or a mestizo in Aymara reality in which multiple cultural differences coexist in parallel, which do not merge, but rather antagonize or complement each other. So what does this coexistence mean in Amazonian cities in the 21st century? How is urbanism shaped by the interdependencies between people and forest? And what is place for Belénians? So the lower area of Belén is represented like this in state cartography, a clearly delimited area where the river and the land are static and secondary to the coordinates for the location of the clearly delimited plots of houses. In state documents justifying the resettlement, Belénians are quantitatively depicted as poor, uneducated, vulnerable with no access to water and sanitation, as having precarious jobs and living in overcrowded houses. Agentless individuals with little capacity to organize, to overcome, and to adapt, and who are dependent on the government for survival and rescue. So what is the relationship that Belénians have with their territory? The relationship between millennials, the river, and the forest is explained by Paddock as multi-situatedness in urban forests or rural cities. Millennials are mobile people for which the limits between rural and urban are diffuse. People are in constant flux, and the number of people living in one household varies throughout the year, as some go into the forest during crop and fishing seasons, and rural dwellers visit the city temporarily for health and education and other services. These mobile Amazonians continue to participate in rural-urban networks, maintain their rural-based preferences and needs, and retain their knowledge of rural resources and products. This dynamism is materially and spatially expressed in multiple scales. The entire neighborhood moves and changes daily, seasonally, and yearly, following social and natural rhythms. Belén's market, the largest one in the Peruvian Amazon, occurs primarily on the streets, appearing every day from dawn until 4:30 p.m., where people sell their produce from their farms and fish that they have caught. And they also sell medicinal plants and beverages. The market acts like a living organism that expands, contracts, and reaccommodates seasonally following the rhythms of the river. Plastic sheets and parasols protect vendors and visitors from the sun and from the rain, and this dense market disappears at night, leaving behind rubbish and buzzards for a few hours until daylight reawakens the market's rhythm and sounds. And during the dry season, private and public property become blurred in the streets in Belén as the ground levels of houses on stilts offer shade and a meeting place for neighbors to chat, to store boats, and to sell products. And temporary elevated sidewalks and boats become the main ways for Belénians to move across the neighborhood during flood season. They appear and disappear according to the seasons. Houses evolve as families grow in number, receive visitors, and save money to build an additional floor. And the houses also adapt to the flooding seasons, occupying the ground floor to eat, to sell products, and to sleep, and moving upstairs when the flood comes, sharing bedrooms and spaces between family members. Not including these everyday habits and adaptations in climate-induced displacement leads to what Hume calls climate reductionism, which happens when climate is first extracted from the matrix of interdependencies which shape human life with the physical world. The relationship between Belénians, the cities, and the forest extends well beyond the area delimited as the lower area of Belén by the government. The resettlement project is the latest manifestation of an imposition of a particular vision of what inhabiting is, and displacement erases place. Nuevo Belén has done so both in terms of Amazonian urban amphibian inhabitation and in taking away the forest from which livelihoods depend and where people, plants, and people, animals coexist with people, humans, according to Amazonian worldviews. And this entire magical world, these worldviews, this knowledge is part of the population's daily routine, and the perseverance of the spiritual logic of Amazonian people is a pillar of cultural resistance. The monotonous and deterritorialized design of New Belén obliterates the political, creative, and spatial agencies of Belénians subject to resettlement, rendering invisible ways of knowing and being that respond from the ground to pressing challenges of inhabitation. So how have people adapted to this situation? Again, I resort to images to represent Belénians' agency and resistance. Practices of emplacement in resettlement projects depict the resilience, resistance, and endurance of those being displaced. Hammond defines emplacement as the relations individuals and groups forge between themselves and the environment, enacted through the innumerable practices that make up everyday life. The acts of building and inhabiting and imagining aspirational futures can become acts of contestation, materializing the possibility of creating a sense of place and citizenship through the appropriation of space. Emplacement as a process is materialized in the iterative spatial and material transformations of the built environment, turning it into places that embody social and political meaning. And these acts of agency are not linked to a grand attempt at rebellion. They are attempts to make spaces ordinary through the processes of squatting and building that try to reclaim normal life and create a home. Residents of Belén modify the houses given to them by the government, infusing them with objects charged with symbolic meaning. Belénians and the forest have reclaimed bulldozer land for cassava, cucumber, watermelon, papaya, and other fruits and vegetables along with the plants of the boreal forest. As a note, I want to avoid romanticizing people's endurance and agency as they operate under particularly challenging circumstances in which political objectives are restrained by the need to procure survival, but people's transformative power is constrained because they require the nation state's assistance. So let's go back to Belen with his last image. I am exploring alternative narratives and representational tools to analyze and render visible the particularities of urban and female settlements in the Amazon, where humans, their worldviews, and the built environment and everyday life are intrinsically linked to the rhythms of the forest and of the rivers. These drawings and images speak to a variety of audiences, to Belenians, to policymakers, to academics, and to the general public. And I hope they are able to offer new ways to see and understand Belen, providing a narrative to overlooked realities of contemporary urban indigeneity in the Amazon rainforest, and creating pathways towards a more empathic approximations to place, to people being displaced in these times of climate uncertainty and injustice. So, thank you.
Fab.
Wow. How many times do you practice to do it in 10 minutes? That's cool. Yeah. I mean, we'll have some questions. I see some hands being raised. We'll take the questions at one set after. So I see Shuja asking, maybe raising a hand for a question. But we'll take it. We'll do the presentations at one go, and then we'll come back to the questions, because I myself have some comments about the representation and alternative ways of governance, like environmental governance. So next we'll move on to the next one, which is Riaz from Dhaka. Riaz bhai? Yeah,
yes.
You can share.
Thank you, Tanjil, and organizers and others who are here. So good afternoon from Dhaka. So let me just show you. So can everyone hear me?
Yeah, 10 minutes starts now. Yes.
Okay. So my motivation for this presentation today is, after I heard about the effort to ReWET Dhaka, I thought about some questions came to my mind about whether or not it is possible, or what are the challenges and some attempts to do something like that. So I found that there are some technical difficulties and also some political ways of overcoming that. So that is the main aspect of this work. So now, talking about Dhaka, the question comes, when we talk about Dhaka, what are we talking about? So the question is, one can see the history of Dhaka as a history of how human as a species have interacted with water with time. So in the left panel, we see the kind of dam of the digital elevation for Dhaka over like 2000, not near Dhaka, but main urban centers that have kind of emerged in the East Bengal area over like 2,500 years. And users argue that it's very close to the same point because it's kind of a raised platform compared to the rest of vicinity. And also there are some geological aspects. But if you look into the history of Dhaka from pre-Mughal to current days, we see that it has started from Gulbarga and then expanded somewhat northward and like that. So the history of expansion of Dhaka can be directly related to how human has interacted with nature, water, in the sense that when it was in the bank of Buriganga, it was when at the time we were actually interacting with rivers. But as we move forward, we dug well, and then we could expand a little bit more. Then we invented how to extract groundwater, and then we knew how to expand more. So, and then now we are expanding to the north and so on. But on the other hand, arbitrarily, Dhaka has been divided through a political decision to south and north, whereas as a natural or even functional system, it doesn't actually follow the natural or other functional ways in which the boundary would have been thought about. So I would not go to the technical aspects of water cycle, but I just want to remind ourselves that water has some scientific characteristics, so there are hydrological aspects involved that we cannot ignore. So, and on the other hand, when we talk about urban, we are actually facing a different reality where the human intervention with nature is in the most one of the most prominent form, where we like to dominate and show our power, like how much we can change the world. We are so powerful. And the thing is, we also need to remind ourselves that we are probably the most invasive species on the earth, in the sense that scientists say that we have originated in Africa, like 70,000 years back, we migrated to the rest of the world and we have kind of invaded the whole world. We are now showing our power in the urban water cycle by interfering with every places. We are using engineering in wherever we can do, even when we can possibly ignore. You could take the power of the nature, for instance, to see how it works for us, whether we wanted to look into the mirror and see how big we are, some sort of narcissism, show that we can actually make a lot of change. So that takes us to a form of urban water cycle, where we have little groundwater recharge, and especially for the urban areas, we actually live on the surface water interaction. So we are actually drying out the cities with time through our action. So that's one thing. So yeah, we can start here. Okay. On the other hand, if you look into the hydrological system, in terms of rainfall, if you look into all the cities, we have like 596 cities in the world, which have more than 1 million population. And if we distribute the rainfall in percentile, Dhaka actually is above the 98%. So we have good rainfall. So that could be a good thing for us. And also, considering the impact of climate change, we see that we are actually facing some fluctuation in monthly rainfall with time. So things are not constant. And we see that in the recent days, especially the monsoon rain is increasing. And also there is a better kind of apprehension that due to the rainfall intensity for a small amount of time could be higher these days recently, and it could the situation could be even more intense in the near future. So that's another struggle. So for Dhaka, rewetting water in the Dhaka approach, there is one big difficulty that we have changed the morphology of Dhaka by constructing the embankments. So I have used the map of Chicago.
Riaz Bhai, just to stop you for 1 second, because it's slightly breaking up. Maybe if you turn off your video, then we might hear you better. Just your video, because I think it's like a bandwidth thing. Yeah.
Okay, let's hope things get better. Okay.
Yes.
So the thing is now. Okay, great. So now the problem here is that when I try to draw a kind of catchment map for Dhaka, like where the natural drainage have been, so it's very difficult because we don't have the natural discharge system in Dhaka. So we have to actually use the pump to get the water out when it's taken too high. And so that's a major kind of messing with the natural flow of water, flood protection approach. So lots of pumping has to be done. And also in terms of groundwater, so that if you look into the water cycle, there are different parts of it. There is surface water, we talked about it, storm water. And now if we look into the evolution of how the groundwater extraction and practices has changed. Like from the left, we see what has been the situation in 1600, and now where are we heading? This is from the paper. So I'm just putting this forward together to see how the city is going to perform. And we have extracted groundwater from more depth each time. So in future, even the lowest level of aquifer, like the lower Upijil aquifer, as the geologists call it, is also going to be depleted with time. So in future, the groundwater has to be brought even from outside. That is going to be really a big challenge. I mean, we are still relying on the technology. I don't know how long we can just so processes and show that we can actually do a lot with the technology. And in case of Dhaka, I think we discuss with the hydrologists or hydrogeologists. We hear that Dhaka has a thick layer of impermeable molecule clay, which makes it difficult to recharge the water. But on the other hand, there is a political dimension of this, because if you have the impermeable thick layer, which does not let you recharge water, I mean, why care about waiting in the city? Because it will not go to the groundwater, stuff like that. This kind of conclusion one can get to very easily, but there are some things to look into. So if you look into, I mean, the other figure that I have discussed, their groundwater decline can get into the observation wells in Dhaka by Water Development Board. You can see the decline with time for different locations. Each of these graphs represent different locations in Dhaka. So that's the groundwater picture. Here is a specific one. I have some thought about, like, probably the difficulty of recharge is being exaggerated. So I kind of tested what is going on. So if you look into the historic time series in the right panel to the on the top, we see how it has declined. So each curve represent 1 year. So I have done some time series analysis of the trend and also kind of correlated with the rainfall data. And what I found interesting is that recharge is going on from the kind of river side, because there is kind of sort of the lateral, some sort of lateral recharge from the river, but not on the top. So that is one side. And what we see, we're seeing in this graph.
Last 1 minute. Sorry, just 1 minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that with only the time lag is increasing with time? So, but there is strong correlation with rainfall. That's one thing. Now, the other thing that is interesting is in many locations in Dhaka, where there is this narrative that the recharge is very slow. On the other hand, there are many ponds in Dhaka. For instance, in Charkola and also Shishu Park, there are places where one cannot hold water in the ponds, so they have dry ponds. So there are some holes in the geological system where recharge could be possible, and the geologists have also found that. So what I'm saying is that we can actually look into the scientific data and look for opportunities to make Dhaka kind of wait again, but there are some difficulties as well. The political and also the politics of knowledge and also the economics of changing things is kind of a long-term approach that one has to take. So I would kind of stop here. Let's see how that is going. So this is a very, very preliminary thought, I would say. So thank you.
No, thank you so much. I mean, I think that complements so much, bringing in sort of like a scientific worldview of understanding how that is there. So that's brilliant. I have some thoughts that I'm jotting down, and I'll sort of like feed them into it. But also, thank you so much for providing a context for the ReWET project, because at the end of the day, the project is all about revitalizing, wetlands. So essentially, the water. So it's good to see sort of like all the entanglements and the multiplicity of how the urban interacts with water. Next, we have Namrata. Water flows in peri-urban India. Also, just introduce yourself in a line.
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm super happy to be part of the discussion with sharing curiosities on Southern urban nature. My name is Namrita, and I am a PhD candidate at Wageningen University in Research in the Netherlands. And my research is at the intersection of ecology, infrastructure, and everyday life making in the peripheries of Indian cities. I'm still in my first year of my PhD, so I have a lot more questions and unraveling of conceptual ideas rather than empirical findings and insights. So today I just want to share how I am thinking through and with water, specifically in the peri-urban regions of Guwahati and Darjeeling in northeast of India, and what it means for the future of nature. So what do I refer to when I am saying margins are marginalized? I mean by margins the physical bounds of the city, but with, of course, reaches far beyond it. And the marginalized to a large extent is the nature in these peri-urban areas, which are extracted for the benefit of the city for its use and then discarded as refuse within these spaces. And in this way, across various levels, there are different ways to analyze it. So one is looking at southern urban processes, which are very different from developed industrialized Western economies. Peri-urbanization itself as a process which is peripheralization of certain aspects from the city to the outskirts, sometimes even within the city, and the nature within these peri-urban regions. And my entry point is quite simple, and it's with a question of what happens when we view water not only as a resource to be directed or redirected or reconfigured, but as a complex entanglement where people, infrastructure, and governance constantly interact, whether it be through contestation or collaboration. And within these many dualities that the peri-urban areas present, which you can sort of see in the diagram, I like to conceptualize the space as a fluid water regime, which I will go into in the upcoming slides, not as passive landscapes, but as an actively negotiated terrain. And I define peri-urban nature as the ecological context within these peri-urban landscapes that are part of local livelihoods, collective memories, seasonal rhythms, and of course, stand in tension with state-led infrastructural visions. And they reveal a very distinct entanglement between infrastructure and people insofar as they become a ground on which you see contesting visions of the future of peri-urban areas and peri-urban nature. But in policy and even in academic scholarship, it's usually urban nature is usually reduced to, say, city parks, rooftop gardens, and peri-urban nature more so as something that has to be planned on, drained out, or piped over. And if we zoom in, there are different, not just strategies of survival, but political ways of everyday life making, despite the fragmented state support in these areas. To make sense of these dynamics, I work with the concept of water regimes, not as fixed systems, but as socio-technical, ecological constellations comprising of actors which are formal, informal, state, non-state, technologies such as pipes, water tankers, springs, stormwater drains, water jeeps, water ATMs, and institutions which are more tacit and implicit rules, norms, unsaid and informal understandings between different actors. And largely to bring this together, I use the notion of heterogeneous infrastructure configurations presented by Mary Lohan and her colleagues, which is very contextual to the Global South, which views infrastructures not just as physical artifacts, but as embedded within socio-spatial technical systems. And through this, I understand regimes also as something that's always in the making. And lastly, my entry point is one on infrastructure imaginaries, which in both cities of Guwahati and Darjeeling, I see competing futures of infrastructure, be it through advancement in technology or real estate, improvement of real estate, through these ideas of world-class cities. But on the other hand, there are imaginaries of people living with nature, local realities, shared water practices, cultural rituals that also are entangled in what the future of peri-urban areas and peri-urban nature could be. And these shape what gets built, who gets water, and how urban nature is, well, valued, undervalued, or devalued. And this desire to belong to and connect with nature rests on a very incomplete turn from tradition to modernity in these regions, and an emotional promise of what this area could one day be and provide to its residents. To ground peri-urban water regimes in their specific context, I anticipate to engage with a wide range of actors, and it's even more so convoluted in peri-urban areas. But when I refer to formal actors, I mean state actors such as public health engineering departments, municipal corporations, disaster management authorities, etc. And by technologies, I mean water pumps, water treatment plants, spring systems, drains, stormwater drains, and flood adaptation measures that governments take. And these are usually governed by very explicit rules, laws, and environmental regulations, whereas in peri-urban areas, more informal actors tend to play an immediate role and in accessing and managing water. And examples of these are private water tankers, neighborhood level water groups, religious institutions, and while formal infrastructures control water, informal everyday practices sort of live with and adapt with the water and the seasonal variations of it. And together, these entangled infrastructures, actors, and nature make up a peri-urban water regime, which is fluid, continuously contested, and shaped by the contrasting visions of the future. And this is largely the objective of my research, and it requires attention not only to understand infrastructure, but also the local politics and everyday negotiations that demand not just ecological infrastructures that function, but also socially just ecological infrastructures. And within this larger objective, I have threefold aims. One is using stormwater and drinking water, stormwater in Guwahati and drinking water in Darjeeling, as entry points to temporarily trace the evolution of nature-society relations in peri-urban areas. And I use 1970 as the start point for my inquiry, is because in Guwahati was made the capital of Assam then, and Darjeeling started having a boom in tourism during that time. And the second objective is to analyze the power relations and asymmetries embedded within these water regimes. And I draw on urban political ecology for my research to investigate how formal and informal actors negotiate, contest, and collaborate over access, infrastructure, and control of these water flows. And three, to examine how diverse imaginaries of infrastructures and nature influence the future of peri-urban areas. And using feminist political ecology, I hope to study the ways of knowing, living with, and relating to peri-urban nature, and analyzing nature-society linkages that could reflect a peri-urban future. And by bridging the concept of water regimes, which is borrowed from science and technology studies, analysis of power flows through urban political and feminist political ecology, and the notion of heterogeneous infrastructure configurations, I hope that I can recenter peri-urban nature and position it as a ground of contestation and collaboration. So just to conclude, I would like to just think out through three questions that or just observations that I've had, and we can carry to discussion. First is that peri-urban natures are quite central to understanding how cities grow and survive, not just the peripheral parts of it, but the city core itself. Second, the water regimes are not just, should not be understood as just technical and institutional, but also be understood as equally ecological in peri-urban areas. And third, if rethinking urban nature from the South means thinking about infrastructure that are not just ecological infrastructure, but socially just ecological infrastructure, then how do we reimagine it? Is it through the everyday practices of people, situated knowledges, more than human entanglements, or are there other ways? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That's also timed well. Looking forward to how this PhD unfolds and what you actually get. Your supervisors will tell you, like, you can't do all of it, but
I know.
trust me, aim high. Yeah, don't give in first. Yeah. Okay. Next, we have Niti and Nisar from IIHS, and hi, Niti. I don't know if it's the IIHS or the IIHS University that I hear from Gautam.
This 2 days old university, so let's call it a university.
Yes, this is the youngest university in the world right now.
Absolutely. But we claim that we have been trying this for last 15 years. So in that way.
Conception after 15 years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I mean, congratulations to everyone. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
there was so much work that we don't see. We see only the announcement. But this is a great. I'm diverging, but I think in terms of knowledge production and how IIHS has done that work and then now becoming university, I think it actually is a great precedent for others. Those who have been operating sort of like outside the traditional mainstream university space. So yeah, congratulations on that.
Thanks. Yeah. And it's lovely to see Namrata. She's one of our alumni.
Right. Oh, small world. Yeah.
Okay. So
10 minutes starts now.
Sure. So we have decided to share our 10 minutes among ourselves. So I won't waste any more time. So hello everyone. And
are you sharing full screen? We can only see the slides, like the inset.
So Nisa, shall we just try doing this? There's some small issue, I think.
It's just the switch view, or if you share the entire screen, then because we're now seeing only we can see the small slides and then not the full screen.
Okay, while Nisa tries this, shall I just start?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. So our presentation is part of an ongoing study that broadly examines the climate change and its health impacts on the fisher folk in urban and peri-urban settlements along the Malabar coast of the Indian Ocean. Nisa, it's still in this thing. And in fact, currently, we are speaking from one of our field sites because both Nisar and I, we are doing field work in Kerala. We are not we are not speaking from Bangalore today. And today we discuss some of the conceptual and theoretical approaches that we are currently working on. This is we have just started this study, I think around 6 months ago, that's it. And then we just started our first round of field work, which is just going on. And now coming to the field, could you please move, Nisa? Next slide, please.
No, we don't see. I think you have to unshare and then share the whole screen, like the entire screen, because we can see it. I mean, let's keep it this way. Yeah, that's fine.
So coming to the field, that is the Malabar coast is the southwestern region of the Indian subcontinent, and it's spanning 4 states, that is Maharashtra, Goa, Karnataka, and Kerala. And our study focuses on the southernmost state of India, that is Kerala, and the fisher folk along Kerala's coastal region. So this orange color, I hope you can see at least that. So that's where the southern, the Malabar coast, and then you can see here Kerala, that's where we are focusing. And 3 districts across Kerala, that's what we are actually looking at. And studies have already indicated that marine fisher folk along the Indian Ocean coast are among the most immediate victims of climate change, and it is multifaceted impacts. They confront increasing occurrence of cyclones, coastal flooding, sea surges, rising temperatures, coastal erosion, hence justifying their selection for our study. Now, coming to some of the epistemological discourses around this whole research question, while the impact and the responses to climate change vary depending on their specific location, economic status, and level of vulnerability, our study relies on a framework that moves beyond the epistemological discourses defining climate in physical terms through the meteorological observations, which often overlook the embodied experiences of those most affected. So we argue that climate knowledge should be connected to the cultural understanding of what climate signifies for specific individuals residing in distinct locations. So this understanding should include aspects of their everyday lives that are, we argue, layered, complex, and deeply embedded in social context, including their identities, beliefs, and experiences. Thus, these forms of knowledge production have a distinct epistemology that differs from scientific calculations and quantitative analysis. This means that what is important for us is a local knowledge, which derived from people, possesses a unique temporality and shared commonality that has formed through years of everyday encounters. So the goal here for us is not so much the definitive establishment of truth, but the search for meaning in their experiences. Thus, the narrative knowledge then becomes the context for comprehending intricate environmental information, while also emphasizing the methods of sensing, observing, and reflecting that make climate personal and relevant to individuals in specific locations. So, how do we do that? Nisa will just explain that. Please go ahead, Nisa.
Yes. Hi all, my name is Nisar Kannangara. I'm a researcher at IIHS. I'm currently working with the project that Nidhi was explained now. And what I do today is that, and what I do now is that my own experience of learning textual understanding of climate change, and then moving to a village where and trying to understand what people perceive of climate change. That experience of mine I'll be sharing in the slides in this presentation. When I first entered to the village, the urban areas in the Malabar coast, the way the first encounter was the language things, and not the way not the way the difficulties of communicating, but difficulties of understanding the climate change. The way I understand the climate change was the mostly textual understanding of the scientific physical science base of the climate change. But when I moved to a village, the urban areas, and try to understand the way how people perceive the climate change, there is a difference. Like the difference I could see that in a way that there was some vocabulary that is different. Say, for example, in the language where people speak, or in my own language, there is no word to refer the climate. Rather, people normally refer the weather. So weather is more common thing that people referring to tell their own experiences of extreme events. And then there is also, the way how the entire epistemology of local epistemology that shaped is also different from the physical science basis of the climate change. So then we try to understand how the perceptions of local perceptions of climate change has been derived or been shaped. And so we find that there are multiple layers of it. There is aspects of body, the way when the body is also a center of epistemology, local epistemology, where people, there is an individual way of understanding things when the extreme event experienced by the body itself. And there is also the livelihood aspects when the extreme events or any long-term changes that affect their livelihood. Then there is a shaping of the collective feelings and collective perceptions around the issues that people experience. And then the language is also different. These are entirely different from what I learned from the text of the physical science text of the climate change. And then I'll try to understand the way how their response to the uncertainties they experience. There is also two kind of responses could see in the areas. One was the collective responses, and then individual responses. Both shape material and non-material changes and responses. And then this presentation we mostly focus on the non-material way of responses and changes. One of that kind of non-material way of responses we could see in the way how the man and ocean relationship has been changed in these settings, and the new vocabularies are formed. In the area where we studied, there is a prominent myth around that was defining the relationship between people and the ocean. One of the myth was that if a woman is unfaithful to her fisherman husband while he is at the sea, the mother sea will punish him often by consuming him. That was the way they, a few decades ago, this was the way the people try understand the uncertainties that happened at the sea. But now, when we look at the way how people refer the sea, the mother sea, the god sea, that has been changed to the thief. Now people are referring sea as a thief, sea as a bad. And there's also rap music. The lyrics will go like this: will we see the shore tomorrow, or we will be swept away. This kind of uncertainties are being very, very shared, and very, that create new vocabularies which shape, which tells the new way of men and ocean relationship. Now I will go to the conclusion. There's a difference between the scientific or the physical science basis of climate change, and people's perceptions of the climate change are entirely, there's a huge disconnections. And to understand the people's perceptions and local realities, there is need for a new language and new vocabularies, and there is also need for understanding the bottom up approaches of knowledge productions, also co-creation of knowledge productions. That was the things that we understood from going to the field with the textual understanding of physical science understanding of the climate change in the southern settings. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Okay, so yeah, thank you so much. I mean, there are so many things to really expand and talk about, but I mean, this is just sort of like an introduction to each other's worlds and what's going on. But I'll move on to the last one in this panel, Asila, and then we'll have like a quick question. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Asila.
Okay, so as I understood it, I share my entire screen, right?
Safest.
Okay. Then, are you able to see?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, shall I get started?
You can click hide so that we don't see the bar. You can see it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Perfect. So press next.
Oh, actually, I'm not able to move the. Okay.
Yeah, it works. Yes, okay. Yes.
All right, fantastic.
All right, 10 minutes. Yep.
Thanks so much. So hi, everyone. My name is Asila Haq. I'm a PhD candidate in human geography at Free University Berlin. And my dissertation research is on urban roads and the politics of inhabitation in Karachi, Pakistan. So today I'll speak about a part of that wider research project that concerns pigeon-human relations in the city. So my focus on urban nature then concerns a focus on urban animals, particularly feral pigeons. So in the 10 minutes I have today, I'll try to share the crux of my argument for a paper on provincializing pestilence. And to be specific, I'm arguing for provincializing understandings of pestilence based on ethnographic research in pigeon feeding sites that proliferate in road interstices in Karachi. So I think pestilence is an interesting concept to think through urban inhabitation, but also planetary habitability, as it disturbs the grounds of cohabitability and defines who or what remains a problem across various scales of the home, the city, and the biome. So pests are the pesky thorn on the side of cohabitation then, as unwanted urban nature, embroiling science, governments, and everyday humans in decisions that cast life or death for a wide consortium of what conservation biology calls nuisance species. So typically, pests tend to be corralled under invasive or alien species. Pigeons are included in that categorization in urban ecology and carry certain implicit assumptions of harm to environments. And it's important to note that while the threats to biodiversity that invasive species cause have been widely documented, conservation biologists have also warned that the threat is context dependent. So the difference between species dispersal and invasion depends on the development of human activities. And in that vein, native species can also cause biodiversity loss through rapid expansion owing to a change in their environment caused by human activities such as land use changes and global warming. So native species then can become invasive too. Species habitation and their incumbent categories are therefore not fixed and are tethered to ways in which humans alter shared environments. Ecological valuations that deem species invasion based on biogeographic criterion are similarly nonsensical, as the expansion of a species in a non-native area would be considered invasive, and a native area is usually referred to as spreading. Moreover, singular factors for native species extinction blamed on quote-unquote exotic species has been criticized in lieu of considering the synergistic combinations of extrinsic factors operating on species with diverse sets of intrinsic traits. Despite these problems in defining invasive species, notions of pestilence take on a stickiness based on forms of bioxenophobia, based on the myth of a stable and pure fauna or flora that have material implications for animal lives. So very briefly, a stark example of this is evident in the story of the sacred ibis, which is a nomadic bird native to in parts of Africa, Egypt, Iraq, and whose presence in Europe was problematized, and based on the work of a few scientists, was classified as an invasive species in Europe. And this led to the culling of 5,000 sacred ibises in Brittany between 2007 and 2010. However, a 14-year study published in 2013 that's cited here found no evidence that the ibis harmed native bird populations, showing that the culling was unnecessary. So the problem here for me then is the stigmatization of certain species, which is prevalent also in urban environments. So urban pigeons are subject to similar stigmatizations. Here's one newspaper article attributing a cause of a bridge collapse in Mississippi in the US, in which 13 people died, to pigeons, amongst a barrage of media articles that did the same. When the report of the investigation came out a year later, the cause of the collapse was found to be a design fault. It is interesting, however, how quickly pigeon habitations were framed as the cause for the collapse, as it reveals that the deep-seated anxieties and prejudices against urban pigeons. The pest, therefore, is not only one perceived to harm environments, but also a being subject to forms of villainization. Anthropologists too have shown that science and governance are informed by nativist and nationalist ideas in the delineation of pest species, and care for endemic species can incur violent outcomes for another. So taking critical cues from conservation biology and critical animal studies, my intention here is to attend to the pest as a social category produced within human discourses, attitudes, and practices that problematize the habitation of entire species, and in declaring them invasive, exotic, or pest, render them readily killable. I'm also thinking of pestilence as a spatial conflict. So space is critical to more than human cities, precisely because pigeons, like many other urban synanthropes, are quote-unquote unintentional natures, as Kritika Srinivasan refers to them, often constituted as matter out of place and of no interest to capital, or superfluous as far as capital accumulation is concerned. Their presence is seen as a problematic to be resolved. Pestilence discourse, shaped by labels such as disease carriers and health hazards, works to further construct a sphere of unbelonging for these quote-unquote problem animals. Cohabitation with pigeons, therefore, has seen a rapid undoing in many cities, as they criminalize feeding, control pigeon populations, and even bask in the thrill of them becoming prey to peregrines, reducing them to what Song calls creaturely life. In Karachi, this globalizing friction between urban governance and pigeons is less resolute for now. In fact, when I inquired about pigeon control in public spaces, the pest control expert I was talking to wryly remarked, "Our government hasn't woken up to the fact that pigeons are a problem." And so there still seems to be a place for pigeons in Karachi, constituted by daily practices of feeding urban pigeons in various parts of the city. And my ethnography took me to 12 such kabutargah, or pigeon feeding sites, marked by earthen plates for grains and water that are ubiquitous along roads, under flyovers, in parking lots, and at traffic circles. I conducted interviews with vendors who sold a variety of bird feed in these areas, and also spoke to the human feeders who visited these sites and talked with municipal officials. So while relating my empirical stories in European academic contexts, I've encountered similar reactions from audiences. First, there's this sense of horror at the number of pigeons and unproblematized feeding. Second, there are always questions about public health and being reminded of the dangers of close interactions with pigeons. And I've struggled to respond adequately to such concerns because in Karachi, there are many ways of relating with pigeons beyond considering the species as a health hazard. And such reactions have inspired this attempt to think about provincializing pestilence and bring to light certain Eurocentric valuations of them as problem animals. So I won't go too much into the empirical stories as requested by the organizers, but just mention that pigeons are readily fed grains in the city, and many vendors and other marginalized actors are involved in caring for the birds, such as nursing their wounds and providing water every day. Pigeons are also entangled in healing practices, particularly in relation to Bell's palsy, where pigeon meat and blood is considered good for treatment. So quickly to just conclude, my goal is far from presenting some sort of orientalizing account of pigeon-human relations that exoticizes these forms of relating. Rather, the goal is to make evident that biopolitics that may be helpful in apprehending pigeon-human relations in northern contexts is not a sufficient lens to understand the pigeon-human intimacies in Karachi. I'm trying to argue that pestilence is not a universal notion and does not beget uniform outcomes across contexts. Rather, pestilence is a localized form of relating to other species that is informed by history, culture, religion, and social inequalities. Notions of pestilence under modernity also severely narrow possibilities for animals deemed pests and legitimate violence against them based on risks to human security. And for more ethical engagement with urban animals, it is necessary to problematize the shoring up of security by some privileged humans and redistributing risk more evenly between humans and animals for more just multi-species futures, as Kritika Srinivasan argues. So that's it.
Yes.
So much.
You may unshare the screen. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, that was. I noticed in one of the slides you have this concept. You didn't talk about it.
Sorry, I didn't hear you. You got cut off.
There was a slide that said the concept of risk as a way of, this idea of provision, from sort of like a Quranic perspective. We don't have time to unpack, but for me, because I'm working with similar concepts, so it's an interesting way of like a different form of valuation, because this question of moving beyond the Eurocentric value, what is valued and what is not, I think negation itself doesn't really help. It helps to a point where you negate that, yes, you need to see value differently, but you need different concepts. So, I mean, the way that I link it is, what Belen was mentioning, this, Amazonian way of valuing, so you see different ways of valuing nature and valuing non-human,
Yeah.
and how it can impact the way that we see, the way that we see, for example, pigeons in your case. But I mean, we're very short on time, so we thought that we'd have like we can actually open up and have a discussion which is like spans 1 hour. For now, I'll open the floor. If there are any sort of explanatory questions, or clarifications that need to happen. Otherwise, I'd propose that we move forward with the rest of the presentations and then sort of like brainstorm where the convergences are. But for now, I'll just do a very quick summary and a way of linking across. Just bear with me for 2 minutes. So for Belen, I think what I picked up was this idea of beyond this idea of a unilateral merging, but a notion of coexisting that she talked about. And then the most important thing was this idea of a temporality that often is invisibilized. So the temporality of nature, but also the temporality of the urban. So I think that took me to this notion of an alternative representation. How instead of numbers, if you were to showcase through the sketches and the drawings, and then how it changed, that gives an alternative reading, but which then tracks back to how do we know urban/nature. And then the predominant value has been sort of a homo economicus. So, a primarily an economic way of valuation that we are beholden to, but then, we move from there. Riaz talked about a multiplicity of manifestation of water. I mean, water as it enters the urban as rain, as ponds, or as as lakes, as surface water, or as groundwater. And then I think Riaz also sort of brings into view sort of like very tangible phenomenon that it's difficult to say. Unless you're being solipsistic, you can't really argue for the fact that groundwater is decreasing and it's causing it has impact on the way that people are living right now. So how do we negotiate between sort of like a social understanding, but also bring in that scientific worldview within the way that we're trying to move away from the Eurocentric? So not to be led by sort of like that scientific one, but at the same time, how do we acknowledge certain ways that or certain enumerations that actually help us to give a picture. Namrata raised a lot of interesting questions, and this idea of valuation, the idea of value came again and again, and this idea of this idea of a regime or a constellation, or in our work we talk about arrangements. So I think it's becoming very clear that if we are to challenge sort of the reductionist way nature is looked at, the reductionist way even the urban is looked at, we need to sort of have a constellation as a way of seeing. So arrangements as a way of seeing and connecting across many different things. With Niti and Nisar, it goes back to this idea of how we know what we know. So questions of epistemology and how language, not as just a simple performative aspect of expressing. So it's beyond that, how it expresses sort of ontological truths behind. So this was very interesting to see, because when you say that, the mother sea, which was supposed to be like someone who disciplines and someone you look up, then becoming a thief in the matter of 30 years, that sort of captures, again, a question of value. What is valued and how it's seen, that is not captured in the way that enumerations happen or mainstream economic data is taken when they look at fisher folks, for example. So how do we know? And this question keeps coming back. And then and Asila talked about I'll not do a summary because it's just the last one, but I think there are so many confluences here amongst the work that it would be great for us from ReWET to sort of like map this out and then start to connect these to see if there is a collective conversation that can happen, because that's the end of the day. We are interested in sort of like a network conversation across this many sites and many approaches. So if that makes sense, with that, we'll maybe like take, I don't know if you are okay with it, we can move on to the next one and not take a break, if that's okay. Yeah, Michaela says okay. I mean, you feel free to grab a coffee, step out, get something as you hear this in the background. That's totally fine. If that's okay, then I'd like to invite, I think it's Jono, isn't it? Yes. Jono Bennett. Jono, are you here?
Yep.
Yeah, let's, we'll test your screen directly. All right, so we're starting with panel 2, and then, 8 to 10 minutes, and, this time we'll keep it really tight. Or so we say. Yeah, Sila, we'll have the open discussion at the end. And the thing is, we'll see how this sort of discussion moves forward. We'll have catch-up meetings, because it's not just about the webinar. We want really to form a network of people who are working on very similar things. So, the conversation will continue in many different fronts. I thought I saw John's screen. Did you?
Yeah, I'm just trying to share the right window. Yeah, just.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm actually going to rejoin on a different computer. Give me a second.
Yeah, can we start with the next one, and then you can come in as the second one, if that's okay?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So, Michaela, who is in?
So
You're in
need
Melbourne.
me. I'm in Melbourne.
Yeah, so it's already quite late. So, thank you so much for joining.
Okay. So let me see. Sharing this. And I go to slideshow. Is this
Absolutely.
working for you?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Michaela. I'm a landscape architect and senior research fellow in the Department of Architecture at Monash University and a founding member of the Monash Informal Cities Lab. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and elders, past, present and emerging, of the unceded lands and waters on which I work in Australia. I also acknowledge and pay respect to the communities of the lands and waters on which I work internationally, including the Sundanese and Makassar communities in Indonesia and the Italke and Indo-Fijian communities in Fiji. So the work that I'm presenting today is the result of collaboration with many communities, practitioners and researchers, and especially my colleague Brendan, who prepared the slides for today with me. Today I want to draw from a river revitalisation project in West Java to provoke broader questions about the politics of co-design and knowledge making in contexts shaped by informality, environmental degradation and marginalisation. In our lab, we work on water-sensitive revitalisation in informal settlements across Asia Pacific. These are often communities rendered invisible or illegible in dominant urban plans, despite being on the front lines of climate change. Our work is not about importing green infrastructure models, but about shaping co-designed site-responsive interventions grounded in local knowledge and capacities. We approach this through design-led, action-oriented research. Participatory co-design is core, not as a procedural checkbox, but as a relational and political commitment to sustained engagement. We work across disciplines and with multiple partners, government ministries, civil society, and the communities themselves, because transformation in these spaces depends as much on navigating power as it does on technical expertise. We ask, what does it mean to design with rather than for? How can design processes open space for under-recognised forms of care, maintenance and adaptation, often led by women, by elders, or by marginalised residents managing waste and water in the absence of formal systems. This question becomes especially urgent in places like the Chitaram River Basin, where governance is fragmented and responsibility is often deferred. The Chitaram River is one of the most polluted rivers in the world. It stretches nearly 300 kilometres, flowing through densely populated and industrialised regions in West Java. The river is a powerful metaphor for Indonesia's urban environmental challenges: rapid industrialisation, unregulated growth, and persistent socio-political exclusion. Interventions in the Chitaram have unfolded over decades. Early efforts focused on reactive cleanups. In 2008, a large-scale initiative with the Asian Development Bank aimed to integrate basin-level governance and infrastructure, but fell short of systemic impact. In 2018, President Jokowi launched the Chitaram Harum program, placing the military in charge of cleanup. This brought visibility and urgency, but also centralisation, militarisation, and little room for community agency. More recently, we've seen a shift. Community-based organisations, researchers, including our lab, and development partners are exploring decentralised, nature-based and participatory approaches. But even these efforts operate in a dense web of actors with conflicting mandates: ministries, donors, local governments, NGOs and residents, all with different capacities, knowledge systems and agendas. The lab brings design research into a broader ecosystem of actors. We're engaged in planning, co-design and implementation with both grassroots and institutional stakeholders. We identify leverage points and tensions to understand how power circulates, where blockages occur, and who participates in defining the future of the river. Together with our partners, we've co-developed 5 principles for river revitalisation: water restoration, water and sanitation services, solid waste services, microeconomy promotion, and climate change adaptation. And these are operationalised in a master plan, which is a 30-year vision and spatial planning framework in a 2.3 kilometre section of the Chitarik River, which flows through 2 riverside villages in the upper catchment on the north side of Bandung. It provides a first-of-its-kind spatial plan and roadmap for transforming the watershed into a more environmentally friendly area and driving a sustainable economy for the surrounding community over the next 20 to 30 years. The master plan is endorsed in local regulation now and is being operationalised together with the government and community partners through pilot programs and design prototypes that are small in scale but potentially catalytic in impact. For example, we've trialled recycled plastic bricks in construction, launched environmental education programs with local schools, and co-developed a black soldier fly composting facility with local community and supported by an NGO partner. While these might seem like isolated interventions, they're embedded in a larger ecological and political narrative, one that's about reclaiming the river, not just as a natural system, but as a space of collective responsibility and care. In these contexts, adaptation is often a form of resistance. Residents repurpose waste materials, redirect water flows, and cultivate informal green spaces, acts that are both practical and political. These everyday practices are entangled with non-human actors, rivers, pollutants, insects, and infrastructure. They challenge dominant assumptions about what counts as infrastructure or who is an urban expert. One example is the ubiquitous use of informal borewalls and grey water systems. These are not merely signs of state absence, but forms of situated innovation. They reflect a vernacular knowledge of hydrology, seasonal flow, and environmental constraints. Designing with these practices in mind requires humility. It means holding open space for friction, contradiction, and mess, rather than resolving or rationalising them. Learning from local and Indigenous ontologies of water and nature helps to reframe how we understand urban ecological restoration. In the West Java context, rivers are not just ecological assets, they are social, spiritual, and historical entities. These worldviews are often erased in dominant discourses around green infrastructure or resilience, but they offer crucial insights into what a more just and plural ecological future might look like. So this brings me to a final provocation. Responsible North-South research, as outlined in the framework by French and Al in 2024, demands more than capacity building or co-authorship. It asks us to restructure research leadership, redistribute epistemic authority, and to move from transactional to transformational engagements. In our projects, including a recent project that I'm leading, funded by the Australian Research Council, we've taken this seriously and are centering local leadership, engaging local and Indigenous knowledge systems, and rethinking the way that the research to practice or policy pipeline is working in context. So to conclude, I offer 3 questions. How can co-design be used not to simplify, but to hold complexity and contradiction at the same time? What if we treated rivers as active participants in entangled landscapes, where waste, water, and care are negotiated through acts of resistance, adaptation, and repair? And finally, how might our design practices and our research institutions learn to listen differently to the knowledge that's already circulating in the margins? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. Learning to listen differently. Yep, that's what hopefully we're trying to do. Okay, so Jono, are you back in the meeting?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Let's get it all moved across. Come on, work.
You're looking like the Dark Knight, like shadowed this much and then.
I blame now probably 15 years of being in architecture schools for that. It's not okay, there you go. You should be able to see. Sorry, go back. There you go. There should be like a black and white drawing on the screen, huh? No, just stopped. Okay, we'll try again. Window. There you go. Okay, black and white drawing.
It's not working now.
Not yet.
No.
It's weird. It keeps kicking me out every time I go share.
Let me see if I can put you as a co-host, and if that it's like a permission thing, because this happens sometimes.
Okay.
Yes,
It's working.
yes.
Well.
Reparative urban practices. Yes.
Cool.
Okay. 10 minutes. Yes.
Cool. So yeah, my name is Jono Bennett. I'm an architectural urbanist from South Africa, and I work between Johannesburg in South Africa and London in obviously England, the UK. And if you picked up from my accent, I am very much South African. So I'll be sharing some insights around my practice-led research that talks about urban nature and focuses on ideas of co-production, design ethics, and the politics of repair. Typically, my work engages with the complexities of Southern African cities and Southern cities through the concepts of Southern urbanism. And my work focuses on grassroots collaboration, where urban nature, built form, and social relations are deeply entwined. And rather than picking up sort of global templates, which I'm sure we all kind of share here, I look more at the relational and situated modes of kind of city and spatial practice. So today I'm sort of focusing on ideas of repair, not as just a technical fix or a socio-technical fix even, but more as a critical framework for kind of rethinking about how we talk about Southern urbanism and the cities within that sort of broader context. So in spaces like South Africa, which are marked by historical dispossession and endemic ongoing inequality, repair offers a more socio-political approach to think about spatial injustice. I should have done that. Spatial injustice as something that is an action, as something that is propositional, as something that is generative, but gives design and gives spatial practice kind of a way forward, a way to act. And through this, I sort of challenge these ideas of best practice. And I think our kind of best practices are obviously very much located and situated in the context that we work from. And I don't think they're translatable actually in many senses. And I think these ideas, and that obviously ties into kind of largely what Southern urbanism kind of speaks to. So theorists like Gautam Bhan, the late Vanessa Watson, Jenny Robinson, and many others have laid a lot of groundwork for reimagining how we frame cities, particularly those in what people refer to as the global south, which, as we know, is not really a very helpful term. So Barnes called Southern invites us to challenge these universalizing tendencies, particularly around ideas of practice. While Vanessa Watson's work shifts the kind of lens on how we see from a south, and critiques a lot of this sort of northern. Geez, I keep sliding. And picking up on Jenny Robertson's work, this idea that all cities are just ordinary cities based on where they are. So this is kind of how I frame these ideas towards building up this idea of repair. And within that, co-production offers obviously both a practical and ethical way of foregrounding these and working through the entanglement of people and place. And even though there's obviously a lot of critique around it, in its principle, it sort of tries to work against sort of more extractive top-down interventions. And in this sense of thinking about co-production and repair, it's much more about thinking, sorry, I keep jumping. It's speaking to kind of ideas of how we value systems and how we work within systems, and particularly against, and I don't like the word informal, like we've had many debates about this, but I think, we in our work, we work a lot more so ideas of maybe aformality, but everything is sort of combined together, which also isn't a very helpful term. But I don't think these binaries of formal and informal are very helpful. But these ideas of thinking through Southern kind of perspectives and lenses starts to offer a way to kind of engage with that, but also to kind of work through those frictions and challenges by acting and not spending all of our time trying to critique and sort of theorize around that critique. So to ground these, I'm going to share a little snippet from a project in downtown Johannesburg in Denver, which is a hostel, which is an apartheid-era multiple story building that typically housed a single group of people. In this case, it's the Zulu men's hostel, so one gender, one sort of tribal group. And this hostel, sorry, again, I did that. This hostel sits actually next to a river that is part of Johannesburg, which is an incredibly water-scarce city, but it also sits along the former mining dumps, which are these huge gold mine repositories from more than 80 plus years ago, which are effectively poisoning the water table. But a lot of income and commerce still is generated, in brackets, informally, basically illegally, through this. So this hostel, which was an apartheid-era infrastructure, that resulted in formal settlement, the kind of rail line meeting the river, meeting the mining dumps, all come together to speak about these complexities of sort of nature and place, and particularly around the sort of need for housing in South Africa. The hostel, in one sense, offers a way to house people through multiple story densities, which is quite difficult to do culturally. At the same time, it also replicates a lot of the violences and the sort of things of the apartheid planning model. So typically what happens in Johannesburg at the moment when the city of Joburg decides that a building, in this case, not the hostel, but a similarly occupied building with multiple stories, is to demolish it and evict everybody who's living in that. And you can see on the bottom of this image here, that's typically what they call the temporary relocation areas look like. And as my father says, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary fix. So people can spend, years in these TRAs where perfectly good infrastructure has been destroyed, obviously huge amounts of waste of energy, embodied carbon, and all sorts of links to place that people then have because of that. So at this moment, the Denver hostel offers this precedent for multiple story living and ways that actually work within this, whereas the city's response is typically just demolish and evict. So these questions about, the scourge of informality that they're causing all sorts of pollutionary things to the river, these complexities are picked up a lot by scholars like obviously Edgar Peterson, Abdul Malik Simone, and it's not to romanticize this sort of resourcefulness that people apply to these, but actually to try and understand and learn from these. Oh my gosh, super annoying. Sorry, that these systems sort of work through. So Southern urbanism offers a way to start to kind of frame that, but more so thinking through what do the ethics of those of us doing work in these contexts, particularly someone like myself, a white South African male, and how do we then form sort of much more like a relational ethics through these type of projects. So this idea of repair in that sense offers ways of thinking not just social and environmental repair, but also sort of justice repair, and what does reparation maybe look like as part of that practice for someone like myself working in these contexts. So these ethical approaches, these concepts that they're trying to avoid maybe these technocratic buzzwords, but rather sort of leaning more on people like Edward Said's ideas of imaginative, or countering those imaginative geographies, and working more towards things that can produce spaces that have an aesthetic based on how they work and how they provide dignity and access to all sorts of things for people in, for example, inner city Joburg. So repair in this context is both material and relational. And while the government often blames people who live in these informal, these multiply occupied buildings, they themselves often take on the kind of maintenance and the repair and the daily acts of care that our city in Johannesburg has effectively not been doing in the last 10 years. And they themselves are almost being punished for kind of taking on these ideas of repair and maintenance. So the Denver hostel, I think, offers a really interesting example. We've worked there for many years. We've been more than 10 years. We've worked very closely with the leadership in those spaces. But you can see how they've formed other systems of cohesion with the river, with the mine dumps, with access to kind of rail and their own cultural and ethno-spatial practices. And some of the projects that we've tried to work through to try to weave some of these together, because of how the government tends to treat people who they deem are, in inverted commas, informal, are projects like the sort of positive numbers, where we tried to, move away from spray painting shacks to number them, but actually working with them to kind of generate spatial plans alongside the numbering processes, and all sorts of sort of handbooks and tools that people are already using, but tying them into their own kind of practices. So these approaches, I think, are kind of more of what we're trying to speak to in this work, around these sort of ethics and actions and what reparative practices might look like as a spatial practitioner, in my case, as an architectural practitioner. And these sort of handbooks, for example, you can see on the screen here, they have this link to the spatial plan that we developed with the leadership of Denver, but they also speak to the way that people carry around these small books, often notebooks with biblical verse, and they use in church and other religious practices. And they have parts of the map in them, and that they then could be put together to make the bigger map, so that becomes a tool in negotiating with government. So these tactics, which Donna Petresca speaks a lot to, I think is what reparative approaches speak to, and how these could work with those that are leading them, how they can work with the ever-emerging ecological challenges in Johannesburg, particularly as the groundwater is being poisoned by the mine dumps and the kind of water scarcity that the city faces. They offer a way, at least in my work that I've been doing, to speak to like an approach to situating Southern African urbanism through kind of reparative ideas of co-production, through trying to like have these evolving ethics that need to be questioned and are not just sort of rules of how to practice, and avoid ideas of the sort of best practice. So these kind of reparative ethics-based approaches to co-production is what I'd like to offer this kind of session and this group and this growing network. And these ideas of what does reparation and repair look like in terms of care, resistance, relationality, and that work with the nature of African cities rather than against it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jono. That's like providing a strong sort of like a theoretical background. We'll quickly move on to the next one. We'll always run out of time. Margarita, are you here?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
I will share my screen.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Also, just introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Can you see it? Just so
we can see. Yes. Full screen. Yeah.
It'll be full screen now.
Yeah.
Okay.
10 minutes.
Great. So,
okay.
Hi everyone. My name is Margarita. I'm a PhD candidate at Milan Polytechnic University. Usually, I'm a social scientist, usually working on climate adaptation governance at local and regional scales. But today I'll be presenting some, I guess, ongoing reflections based on some insights that we gathered in the NB South project, which was a project that ended last year, a collaboration between Milan Polytechnic and the University of Brasilia, where we generally were interested in exploring perspectives on nature-based solutions from the global south, and focusing specifically on climate resilient, MBS for climate resilience through retrofitting. So I'll just jump right in. So the starting point is that MBS, we all know, is an approach that is in fact gaining a lot of traction recently. It's attracting funding in the realm of climate mitigation and adaptation, as well as biodiversity conservation. And this is because ideally it sort of presents itself as a win-win approach that promotes both human well-being together with environmental quality. However, I mean, we've explained thoroughly today that this is all also contested and very problematic. For example, due to risks of further neoliberalization of nature, exacerbation of existing inequalities and injustices, all the while purporting ecological functions. Recently, MBS have also been criticized for advancing sort of the same old anthropocentric rhetoric and therefore reinforcing the dualism between humans and so-called nature. But here's my provocation. At the same time, MBS as an approach, I think does have innovative and transformative potential. I think there's much to be gained from foregrounding and fostering regenerative relationships between people and nature, especially in cities. So I think we can agree that MBS currently remain mostly apolitical, anthropocentric, and non-transformative. But I think it doesn't have to be that way. And my proposal that I'm happy to be discussing with you today is that by mobilizing political ecology and more than human lenses, we are able to recognize the plurality of relationships and entanglements that link humans and the biosphere, and hopefully then fully realize the transformative potential of MBS. So a few words about the project. As I mentioned, its focus was on MBS for climate adaptation through retrofitting, but generally the approach was to have a sort of view of MBS from the global south. For example, one of the first steps was to create a literature review and a compendium of nature-based solutions examples from the global south. And we also had a case study in Paranoá, which is a city close to Brasilia. And here we conducted field work in collaboration with the local University of Brasilia, as well as several local partners, including a community center. And the idea was to have an ethnographic approach with observation, interviews, focus groups, as well as participatory co-design. Because I'm a social scientist, but I was working with a team of mostly architects and urban designers. So our approach to this was based on assessing the plurality of values that residents attribute to so-called nature, both in general and in their daily lives. And we used this then to ground the design of a new nature-based solution, which was actually part of a larger green infrastructure strategy, in existing histories and existing relationships that residents have with the landscape. So I won't go in all of the nitty-gritty of the case study, but I'll just present a few results, a few things of what we learned, and then discuss how this then informed our pilot, and offer some reflections that can contribute to the discussion. So we learned that in their daily lives, residents of Paranoá are concerned with a variety of issues related to sustainability and a good living environment. These include access to health and access to clean air, safety, access to food, and space for leisure. We also learned that residents' relationship with nature is multifaceted, and that they readily express a wide range of values related to nature using different frames. And for this, I appreciated that earlier, actually, we mentioned the fact that the idea of valuing itself can be contested. And in fact, we ourselves, we adopted the life framework of values by O'Connor and Kenter, which kind of tries to reframe this using, sorry for the play of words, but different frames. And these are the living from, living with, in, and as nature. And we were actually surprised to find that the living as nature frame was the most prevalent among the residents of Paranoá. You can see here a quote by one of them: "Nature is in each of us. We are nature." And I thought I would mention this because I thought that was interesting, because in all accounts I had read previously from the global north, this was the least used. So yeah, I just thought that this was interesting. But the research also surfaced some conflicts over the use of space and access to nature in the Paranoa settlement, which are connected to political struggles and the history of displacement in the area. Interestingly, these conflicts are embodied in the Paranoa landscape with some elements holding particular political meaning. And I'll just give 2 examples here. First of all, the residents expressed an appreciation for the native biome called Cerrado, which is sort of like a tropical savanna. Cerrado in the area, though, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the history of Brasilia, but it was, Cerrado was largely removed in the area to make space for larger settlements. And it was also in some areas around the settlements supplanted by non-native species as a result of top-down decisions by the central administration. Another example is the very close relationship expressed by some of the current residents of Paranoa and the original settlements, which is actually closer to the lake and is now an ecological park. So it has been turned over from like a living settlement to a sort of conservation area. This is also something of a leitmotif, I think, among different presentations that we've had also last time. So the park's fruit trees, which were planted by the original residents, are a symbol of placemaking. And the fact that residents were then removed and taken to a closer settlement, they were removed from the original settlement, but also from the access to that specific nature that it provided. And this is by them lived as an experience of displacement. So very briefly, this sort of varied ethnographic research that we conducted, we then tried to integrate it methodologically in our co-creation process. And so as a result, we designed a pilot nature-based solution that has been since implemented in one of the public squares in Paranoa, which you can see in the picture. And it is Cerrado-based climate resilient belt that features a rain garden, infiltration trench, and a bioswale. And this area was, I don't have a picture of how it was before, but it was once flood prone, highly impermeable, and now instead is managing stormwater locally. And it's also, importantly, it's also reconnecting people with the native biome of Cerrado, so it also has an educational function. And finally, the hope is that it also enhances community sociability. So 3 points that I would like to bring towards the discussion. First of all, bringing the political back into ecology. Through this case study, we realized that MBS planning should not be blind to political struggles and dynamics. Instead, it should ask for whom it is supposed to strengthen well-being and which relationships it will privilege. To this end, what we found really useful was the acknowledgement and valuing of practices that are already happening on the ground. So in our case, the multifaceted relationship that residents already have with the landscape and with its history. So we learned to listen differently, I guess, to local understanding of nature and to build on it. And finally, justice for whom and by whom. We also appreciated learning that residents foregrounded the importance of certain landscape elements, certain biomes themselves, and these had been previously sidelined or destroyed. So our attempt with the project was to re-centralize these non-human elements in the pilot design. And so I think sometimes it can be hard to put in practice the more than human perspectives that we think are so important that we need to surface, but operationally, like this was a whole point in this project, was to understand operationally, how do we do this? How can we make MBS planning more just? How can we actually repoliticize it? And maybe it's a simple answer, but listening to residents, listening what they have to foreground, then this was helpful for us. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Margarita. We'll come back, and then I have made some notes so I can also raise some questions. Next is Ifat, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
Hello, hi. So I'm going to share my presentation.
Yeah. And yeah.
Is it all right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So hello everyone, I'm Ifat Mohammed Khan, and my background is from architecture and urban design background, and I have had professional experience in architectural field for almost 5 years. Got the opportunity to work with architect Kashif Choudhury in Bangladesh and architect Francis Kere in Germany. So through my work, I was particularly interested in social responsive architecture. So right now I'm doing my PhD at University of Dundee, and it's only been 5 months. So yeah, I'm at the very beginning. So my supervisors are John Rowan, who is the head of UNESCO Center for Water Law Policy and Science, and Dr. Nandan Mukherjee. So I'm gonna, my PhD focuses on regenerative approach to designing climate resilient housing for marginalized communities in Bangladesh. And why it matters, because Bangladesh is among the most climate vulnerable countries in the world, yet each monsoon season disaster reach new extremes. So my question would be, like, when designing the disaster resilient housing, we never ask the question that how does one relate to the feeling of always being displaced, and how does life work when survival depends on forces beyond your control, or on the mercy of the river, or on the mercy of new land appearing from nowhere. So why it matters, because the repeated relocation erodes belonging and economic stability of the people. Current design ignores culture, memory, and livelihood, and most housing models overlook community identity and ethno-architectural practices. So while going there, I found that disaster resilient housing has traditionally been conceptualized within a binary framework, where initially characterized by emergency shelters, followed by permanent reconstruction. This linear approach often overlooks the nuanced incremental process by which communities genuinely rebuild after displacement. So my focus would be, how would I see the house? Should I see the house as a dwelling or as a living machine by Corbusier? So there my key themes would go around disappearing lands with disappearing memories, and dwelling as continuity, home as a site of regeneration, ritual and survival, participation versus inequality, decoding power dynamics in design processes, and innovation, replication, and the ethics of scalable design. So to figure out all of this, I had to go through different case studies. So I'm gonna show some to present some questions in the end, because I'm really at the beginning of my PhD, so I have to go through some case studies to understand. So before that, from the literature review, I tried to find out different approaches of climate resilient or disaster resilient design approaches from the disaster-prone countries. And from global reviews, initial global reviews, I found out that these houses frequently adopts like North-based or Western-based ideas, neglecting local culture and knowledge, and where also nature-based solution in housing often follow up standard frameworks, which most of the time comes from the North, with minimal cultural context. Communities are frequently displaced or ignored in the process, and projects prioritize quantitative success metrics, design biased over qualitative lived experiences, creating solution detached from the social realities. So this is a project by this is a project called Macau Floating School by architect Kunle Adermi, which was widely celebrated because of its used local materials and ecological principles. Also, its unique shape and form, because it's aesthetically pleasant all the time. So the many sustainability premises of the project included solar energy panels to water sewage system to locally procured bamboo and wood, and where the architect concluded the project as adheres to ideal standards of sustainable development. Despite all of this international acclaim, structural inadequacies and safety concerns led to its collapse. And when it collapsed, the main head of the school, the teacher, stating that we are turning to our centuries-long traditional of buildings on stilts. Not a single one of our huts was destroyed in the storm. So from this project, where Adaya wanted it to be a standard of sustainable development, where he imposed an alien structure to the community, never discussed or included them in the process itself. So it highlighted the ethical concerns of experimental architecture imposed on marginalized communities, emphasizing the critical gap between design innovation and community trust. Another project I'll talk about from Bangladesh, it's Arcadia Education Project. It's a very noble project. It's a very interesting project by Saiful Haq, and it had like bamboo recycled materials, plus it is amphibious to adapt to the monsoon waters. And it got really Aga Khan Award, which is global recognition it received, but still, however, because of the bamboo, because of this nature-based materials, the connection with the water and the rainwater, it weakened the structure from time to time, and then it got distracted in 1 or 2 years time period, and most of the time the community was skeptical to send the children to the school, because as it amphibious house, it's a new concept for the people in Bangladesh. So when it floats, it didn't have the anchor, so it would shift away from one place to another. So this community skepticism about safety and the importance of aligning architectural intentions with local realities and practical functionality also didn't work in this project. And the other one, I'll just go through it. The Kudipari, the Marina Thalosum project, which is really amazing project to look at. And it's a modular structure as a potential shelter for the marginalized landless population. The space frame structure is built with structural bamboo, steel joints, and facilitates assembly, disassembly in a very short period of time. And the local material used bamboo, like a nature-based solution we are seeing through all of these projects here. So, but still, this prefabricated steel joints which used in the structure to give it a very unique, aesthetically pleasant look is very alien to the local communities, because they are not really, they use rope to connect the bamboo, and these prefabricated steel joints, well, they allow modularity, they limit local autonomy in repair and adaptation, while it creates the dependence on the external supply chain. And also there's a vernacular disconnectedness, that the form and the expression diverge from regional architectural identity, traditional char houses or courtyard system or spatial rituals, and communities might view it as a foreign despite of its being aesthetically pleasing architecture. And the other examples I have, like this is NGO-based NGO-based projects. What happens here in Bangladesh, like in disaster resilience, they focus on United Nations or BRAC or the government project. They focused on the standard sustainable solution and ecological standards, and while they completely lost the cultural appropriateness and long-term community autonomy of this every project. And all of these projects, community members helped build the homes like those I have shared, but the model was primarily designed always by the architects, NGOs, and research institutes, while maintaining the technocratic control. So after going through this different examples, for me, I want to ask, like, when designing post-disaster shelters for marginalized communities, a fundamental question for me it arises: should these structures function merely as utilitarian machines for habitation, or should they embody the essence of dwelling, fostering sense of place and cultural continuity? And plus another thing, the notion of taking risk and experimenting with nature-based solution and sustainable architecture is always welcome in architectural field. However, it becomes quite perplexing if one considers the question of where and with and by whom those risks are taken. So while doing my reviews, I also have this question that how ethical it is for an architect or urban designer to put a technocratic NBS facade like sustainability or a borrowed idea and experiment with the marginalized communities, because it's always them whom we put on the pedestal for all the risk we want to take in the society. So yeah, I'm gonna stop it with in my presentation with these 3 questions for overview.
Ifat, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Just to say, no one knows, trust me. So even after like 3 years when you finished the PhD, it's like this is highly contested, and absolutely, good to see this, bringing sort of like this, built environment professionals and discourses around nature and urbanism coming together. That's great to see. Last but not least, it's interesting, we did not plan this, but we're ending with a presentation on the, coming from an Amazonian world. We started with Amazon, and then we're sort of going back to Amazon. So the last one is Luana. Are you able to share?
Yes. Hello.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. 8 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
So that we can have a 5-minute discussion. Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about the plan of going forward after you finish. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation to share and to hear all the amazing presentations. I'm Luana. I'm a PhD student, and I'm bringing what we have already collected from previous research and what I'm going to do next in my PhD. Well, I was always interested in understanding the relations between people and what is called nature. In the city I am from, Manaus, it's the biggest city in the Amazon, 2 million people, and more specifically, working with the concept of green infrastructure and ecosystem services. We use satellite imagery, online survey, and conduct a few interviews to better understand the people's use of any kind of greenery in the city. And from the start, we were open to notice any kind of vegetated area, which it put our work in a different position from what is often done in those kind of studies on green infrastructure. So to broaden the very concept of environmental justice studies, we understood that studies should not only focus on the distribution and access to certain spaces or specific ecosystem services, but also investigate if the needs of people are being met by the green spaces available and if there is multifunctionality they are being provided. So we understood from the very start, based on our own experiences, that maybe here in the Amazon, we could not restrict what is considered as green space or urban nature to formal parks and squares. We already were broadening the notion of city green spaces to embrace any remaining, especially forested areas, regardless if it was a green space on the official environmental zoning or not. So we found out that the formal urban planning of the city only considered formal green spaces, such squares and parks, as part of its ecological zoning, following the urbanism toolkit of the global north from the 19th century. When we applied the vegetation index, we saw that there are more vegetated areas than what is recognized in the official zoning, and people were using it. So also the environmental protected areas, there are still forest fragments inside the city, are only protected because of its regulating and supporting ecosystem services. So nobody is legally allowed to enter any of those for performing cultural rituals or to collect seeds, water, fruits, or as it is often done by riverine communities, population that live outside the city space and are integrated in the surrounding forest. So once someone then maintains those elements of a way of life closer to what I'm calling a broader Amazonian culture, when this person moves into the city space, they will struggle a lot more to access forest areas or rivers with quality inside the city. Well, Manaus has 150 rivers running through its city space, but only one is still clean. However, we found in our survey a few people that use those rivers for washing, for swimming, which was surprising, but shows how people have those spaces as part of their daily lives, no matter where they live, inside the city or not. On a bigger scale, the same happened to forested spaces. People from every part of the city, the center or the periphery, still access remaining forested areas around their homes to cultural aspects like health, leisure, spiritual well being, sense of belonging, to even provision of natural materials. And most of those spaces are not environmentally protected, they are in particular properties or in not regulated remaining public areas. And like I said, the ones that are public cannot be used for those purposes. Well, it resonated a lot with what was presented here the other day, last week from Bangladesh, that was addressed as green formality. So those users are not recognized or provided by the state, even though people still use it. We now understand that we have to consider a city or any space as a socio-ecological system where there are aspects of dependency of those green spaces, and we are treating it as any vegetated area to design and plan a green infrastructure that really provides all kinds of ecosystem services that the population needs. And what we learned from it is that we should broaden what is part of an inclusive and just green infrastructure. And probably in a co-produced planning, we would find out from the inhabitants what is urban nature for them and how it is part of their daily lives. We learned that the spaces that hold closer aspects to forest fragments were more visited than others. So we asked how we should plan green spaces in this city. What should be the reference for the design of it? If you want to achieve an emancipatory environmental justice lens that really considers plural ways of life found in the global south, the city greenery can be studied on how those spaces are being used and how is the quality use of it for the implementation of broader policies that really consider marginalized groups, identities, and needs in their everyday lives. From it, in my current research, I moved from the social environmental justice to an epistemic justice lens. So now I'm looking at how people that live in riverine communities, even outside city space, how they actually manage the forest, the rivers, soil, the space they live, work, and they use in their daily lives. We want to understand it as a local spatial knowledge. So I investigate the socio-ecological practices they engage and create to live their lives surrounded by what we call nature, but is basically forest. And from my perspective, the next step is to consider the whole knowledge system of this specific culture we are engaging with, the riverine community, as crucial part to reach social justice in the planning and design of this urban nature. So to start in the Amazon, we need to assume that built space also includes the forest itself, that is not only human-made, but many more than human actors have agency, because we know already that this biome was created the way it is now by many generations of indigenous people that came before. So it's not only natural, and those riverine communities keep some of that knowledge of managing this environment. So we should be engaging with it as a different kind of knowledge. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I mean, I think no one could have planned it better, in the sense that the last question where you ended, this idea of what is natural, I think it's quite foundational to what we're trying to really do. What we have, how we have learned how to think of nature in relation to the urban, and what is natural to the people across the world in different worldviews, and to acknowledge the difference. Because I think today, for me, it was really a spectacular spread across a South-South dialogue. So, Andy, do you have any closing comments? So just so that we know where we are, as you know that I mentioned this webinar is not just about extracting your knowledge and not giving you anything in return, okay? So we're trying to really do things differently. As part of that, we said we want to make it more of a network of sharing our resources and expertise. So what we will do is, as part of the ReWET team, we will start building what we're calling a Southern Urban Nature framework. And then we'll actually go through and then analyze what's presented last week and this week. So there are 20 presentations. We'll come up with a matrix, but we'll not do it alone. We'll co-produce this. So we'll do it in a very live way. We'll share with you. You'll be able to comment on each other's work so that we see naturally that you might choose to comment on another Amazonian project, but also you might want to choose based on epistemology or based on methodology, so that there will be like different sets of overlap. And then we'll sort of like breed it, we'll sort of try to grow it naturally based on where the interest lies. And, all of it will be done in a co-produced space, such as, we use Miro board, so that everyone can start populating it. And then we'll take that, sort of like, co-produced matrix, and then we'll see if we can go towards a collectively written paper, which is co-authored by everyone. And we want to see the limits of how many co-authors journals allow. Right now we have like 45 people, so which is normal because in medical school they have like 70 people writing one paper. But again, we just don't want to extract data from you. We want to do it because this idea of we talked about ethics. I think Jono brought this out, but I think this has been mentioned. This question of by whom, with whom, these questions become so much prescient. I mean, they become sort of analytical lenses that is not often part of the NBS projects, but then ethical researchers start bringing them on board into even into projects that are developmental projects, quote unquote, mainstream development projects. I'll leave the last 2, 3, 5 minutes if anyone wants to comment on the overall. Anyone wants a summary statement. I'll leave the floor open for that. If no one picks it up, Andy, you can go ahead and do that. But for now, yes, this is an ongoing process. You feel free to opt out at any point. But of course, this is we're trying to grow a community, so let's see if we can do that. Michaela, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Tanzil. I have to say I didn't manage to catch much of last week's session because of the timing.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to watching
we'll share
once the recording's available. But I really like the idea of mapping the connections between speakers and the projects. And in today's session, we could see how things like politics and power and relationships, values, justice, entanglements, illustrations as a tool for revealing different kinds of chronologies and relationships. The thing of ethics, I think, this idea of relational ethics that Jono spoke about, connecting with, how do you partner with communities, with environments, with places, without appropriating which knowledge is actually important, and how is that valued and by whom. I think that all of these kinds of ideas were echoing, across so many of the presentations even today. I'm really looking forward to, working and talking and discussing more into the future. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Feel free to jump in. Or Andy, who has been doing all the labor, of like unseen labor. Do you want to go ahead, Andy? Yeah.
Yeah, there's no pressure for anybody to participate if they don't want to. in terms of the paper that we're going to hopefully write, but me and Tanzil will come up with a kind of matrix, as he said, to develop a table, developing synergies and entanglements between us, all of our work. So hopefully we'll share that in the next few weeks. I've got a big exam coming up, but maybe if you can share that maybe a month from now, then we can have a few discussions and then hopefully get material output from it. So, very much.
I mean, we'll somewhat follow like more closed door sessions for those, because those will be like really discussions, a bit more safe space, because if this goes into sort of a publication territory. So, but again, this is open, so anyone who is listening in but not part of the network, feel free to reach out. We are open for more, but really we want to. I feel all this transdisciplinary dialogues. It's difficult to do it after the project has been done. It's much better while ongoing projects, ongoing engagements are going to create a network of learning from each other, and not just share findings in a conference. By that time, the boat has sailed, so to speak. So with that, on that note, I'd like to end today, but this is not the end. This is only the beginning. All right. Thank you so much for
thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you and take care. If there are any questions, please reach out. We'll email back, of course.
Thank you so much for the platform. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Brilliant.
Bye-bye.
Take care.